Last video for the day, I'll give it a few minutes to let people log on. It's been a terrible day of forums. I was extremely busy with forums, but on such a rough schedule today. But systematically, everything Canadian, kick him out. And of course, NDP, wow, are they that ultra commie style party? They do not want any way, shape, or form of any kind of not debate, but truth or challenge to the BS that they wish to project. And when we look at Horgan in British Columbia, right now in British Columbia, you're not fooling this old dog. This old dog has studied First Nations inside and out. I know, especially from the West, I'm not very strong in the East. That's coming really, really fast. But what's interesting is I learn of the First Nations out here in the East. They don't have a great communication system with the West. Of course, that's treaty. But as you get to BC, you get into all that unceded land territory, things I'm very, very familiar with. When we look at provinces, about the mega cities, the C40, New World Order agendas, the worst treatment of First Nations absolutely is impacted by that C40, by that NWO, and a lot of Canadians don't know this. Some of the First Nation treaties, Métis, don't know anything about this, as well as we get into Inuit, doesn't know anything about this. Different systems, depending on if you're in ceded or unceded territory, if there's treaties. Different portions of BC are much like Alberta when we see the overlap of Treaty 8 and what the government in BC is planning to do to First Nations. What they are doing to First Nations and unceded territory that is much the same as what happens in Ontario. And I know these things. There's so much to get out, so much to share. So I went into the Symposium. No, I'm not First Nations. No, I didn't get a haircut like I'm in there trying to pretend I'm First Nations. I would never do that. I've never claimed that. I did go from an invite from a First Nations citizen and a band member of a band, and that's how I get into these things. I always have to be invited. It's like the vampire thing. You have to be invited. I'm just being a little bit of humor here, but it's true. I don't just walk into these things and bully my way around. I take the invites. I make sure everybody knows. Sometimes I've messed up on etiquette. A lot of chiefs have been very good about that. But this British Columbia Symposium was not hosted by chiefs. There are First Nations in there. There may be some chiefs tuning in or whatever, but this is government. The speakers were clearly, for the portion I got, from the CPC, brought in by none other than NDP. What I did get to hear and hear firsthand from First Nations of British Columbia, of the coast, talking about these land settlements, what is and what is supposed to be with the Crown and First Nations. And they say, well, why is this new government changing the rules? When we were under the Liberals in BC, it was a totally different system, and they made us, negotiate this way, specific tribes, get everybody together in one group. Then they do that, and then the NDP comes along, change all the rules. Here we go, crown rules, right? If it really was one crown of the Queen of England, why would provincial governments have changes according to Crown rule? Why would they have power over that? Because they are the Crown. Whoever wins these government positions, i.e. Premier, gets to set up all new rules, including those rules for First Nations as well, especially when you get into provincial Crown land or unceded territory of a province. Unless it's government property deemed by the government, federal Crown land, or federal parks or federal privy. They changed the rules, absolutely. First Nations, I did get to chat in the function. As soon as I gave a narrative that the Conservative representatives and the NDP absolute government, as soon as they didn't like those real presentations, I was thrown out on my butt. Didn't matter who invited me there, even though I'd went through the proper process. I was thrown out. And then I guess I made a comment I was not to be there. Why? Because I'm not lying to First Nations? Because I gave a truth when I could see the heart of the question brought forward by a First Nations who questioned this panel and said, why? Why is this? And I put in the chat and I give the why. UNDRIP that BC has adopted is non-binding. Do you know what that means, First Nations in Canada, as you are an absolute minority, as you question why the government keeps imposing on your land, changing the rules with every incoming government, and now with UNDRIP, it's non-binding in international law, and I'm proving to First Nations what is that international law, what's imposed on Canada, and what isn't when it's non-binding, meaning when Canada signs, they take a law that's not internationally binding, meaning no oversight. The Crown is your oversight. They take UNDRIP, they administer it any way they like as they get elected in every election cycle. They will change it, they will abuse it, they will re-administer it, they will go through their legislatures provincially or parliamentary system federally, pass new laws to absolutely transform all of it any time they wish. Especially what we call civil rights. Civil rights in the province, they can really do a lot of damage. There is no codified constitutions for First Nations to understand that. That means provinces act any way the absolute majority premier wants to. They are the Crown. First Nations need to know this. Canadians need to know it, because the same abuse being done to First Nations is absolutely being done to all Canadians. They use the same system. It's why unions are crumbling, why they're having so much trouble. And then you think the NDP is for you, but they're for the Crown. They go for themselves. That's become evident. They've hijacked a lot of these tribunals they make for First Nations, or Symposium, or the worst is when they say foundation, society. These are all attachments of absolute government autocracy to control all of you, to steal from you at will. First Nations get it the worst. I'm working at it. I'm going to continue to work at it. It's very sad that NDP threw me out, but if you look at my history on my timeline, NDP always throws me out. I've destroyed several of their politicians live witnessed in major forums, and it's no good when you can destroy a labor minister or you can destroy a Superior Court justice and you're a guy wearing a hoodie after putting up signs all day, chopping wood and setting up your own campaign and you're poor. They don't like it when a guy like me comes in there and I can talk turkey and I can absolutely embarrass them, uncover most of their lies, learn their platforms better than they know their own platforms. Everything I present is true. You're going to see more and more activity regardless. It's too bad we're in COVID. These kinds of things really upset me. By the way, the First Nation, for First Nations, the First Nation person who invited me, they got thrown out too. Can you believe that? Pretty sad. And this was not organized by First Nations themselves. This is more government bureaucracy imposing will upon people, bringing in conservative and government experts who are Crown, who absolutely don't care about First Nations at all, never have. And today in Ontario here, over the course of a day, I got to take international law with a First Nations skilled, knowledgeable person, bringing forward history of all the things First Nations have fought for in courts. And do you know what I was able to do? All the abuse that person took, and they go, we finally won, and there's years where they won, and I go like this. They won in this year, That's because 6 months before international law was binded in this exact law bound to Canada, the Canadian politicians only allowed First Nations to win because the world binding powers said they had to. I can go on and on. I can show First Nations why so much things are abused with them and land and everything else, because there is no international law from the binding powers that says Canada has to obey. Canada only gives First Nations what the world absolutely enshrines and says they have to, because the politicians are mostly afraid is when countries like USA, Russia, China, France, and UK make laws for the whole world binding, and then they catch Canada's politicians not doing it. Any one of them can put sanctions, trade embargoes, military intervention, all the way up to execution. Of course, Canadian politicians are chicken shit. They will never, ever even get to the point of sanctions. Trade embargoes, yes. Limited sanctions, yes. A lot of Canadians I know don't understand this stuff. I know the same is for First Nations. But what was beautiful today is I saw First Nations citizens in British Columbia challenging these ideas, going, something's not right here, and they tried to get the answers. I laid it out for them in the chat box. At least a lot of people got to see it. And the first thing the government bureaucracy did was throw me out of my butt. That should wake up a lot of First Nations. It should wake up a lot of Canadians too. I'll post it and I'll give the email where they say you've been removed. Happened to me all the time. It happens all the time, especially with NDP. They're one of the worst, most corrupted, and it's sad because they don't want to be challenged in the fake narratives. And they absolutely, in the province of British Columbia, teamed up with CPC on this issue, this file. I don't think it would matter if you had the elected Liberals. It would have been the same thing too. It doesn't matter. It's Crown power. I'm not picking on Liberal or NDP and Conservatives. Just who in those areas in this have the power and had the power of the time to do what they did. That's the truth. They do this to Canadians, First Nations. Doesn't matter. Canada will always take from you everything they absolutely can for foreign interests and powers and rape, pillage, and plunder you, regardless. They will continue. UNDRIP is not going to help First Nations because it's the Canadian Crown, the politicians, who are allowed to administer it any way they like. If it fits their narrative in an area, they'll use it that way. If it doesn't, they'll change it, twist it. First Nations have gained nothing. It's sad. It's really sad. But it's going to come. I'm going to keep going, keep fighting, keep the battle alive. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.